Meadow Community is a large 1.4 metre square photo collage of leaves, celebrating the 112 species of wildflower I found in the meadow areas of Hamlands in 2023. The Friends of Hamlands invited me to give a talk about the image and the background to its creation. This recording was made about a month later. For 20 years, I've explored the genus Fritillaria, both through science and in art, and have collaborated on various science projects. Within the London borough of Richmond upon Thames, and just to the edge of Hamlands, is a small population of Fritillaria meleagris, the snake's head fritillary. From its form, I think it is of horticultural origin, and I suspect someone planted about 10 plus years ago. They are appropriately sited within the floodplain area, the River Thames, and Ham House. There are records of it naturalising in other parts of the borough. William Curtis recorded it between Kew and Barnes in his Flora Londinensis of 1777. This population persisted into the early part of the 20th century. Probably one of the most famous populations is in the water meadows in front of Magdalen College, Oxford, again by the River Thames. It is thought to have established from escapees from the Botanic Garden in the early 1700s. These Fritillaria meadows are the starting point in my quest to illustrate a meadow in a way that captures its diversity, complexity and seasonal change. Here's Iffley Meadows. It's a couple of kilometres south of the earlier meadow at Magdalen College, and the Fritillarias here have gone over and their capsules are starting to ripen. At this point the buttercups dominate in late spring. This is Portholme Meadow in Cambridgeshire, another Fritillaria meadow, and again with buttercups, but starting to transition from red clover and narrow-leaf water droplets. This brings me to the meadow areas of Hamlands. I'm lucky enough to live close to these species-rich meadows, so naturally it's where I should start my visual exploration. This image shows a view in early summer, where the hogweed is starting to come into flower. And here, lady's bedstraw is dominating the area. Let's start with some background to Hamlands, which is in southwest London in the borough of Richmond upon Thames. It's almost 80 acres, bound by the River Thames and 20th century housing. Using maps, photographs, it's possible to reconstruct its recent history. By the mid-1700s, much of the original vegetation had been altered to a mix of wet hay meadows, arable fields, orchard and commons. Housing was limited to Ham Street, Ham House and the north and west of Ham Common. More than 200 years later, the railways had brought growth to Richmond, Twickenham, Teddington and Kingston, but Ham is little changed, still farmland to serve the needs of the capital. It all changed in 1904. The iconic view from Richmond Hill across Petersham Meadows by the side of the Thames was considered threatened by urban expansion. To secure the view and the hay meadows, which were grazed by cattle in late summer and autumn, the Lammas rights for Hamlands were surrendered, and Petersham Meadows was gifted to the people of Richmond. With the Lammas rights gone, the Dysart family were free to alter the land. They gave a licence to the Ham River Grit Company to extract gravel. The River Terrace gravels along the lower Thames were laid down in the Quaternary. The gravels here and further west are known as the Kempton Park gravels. This photo shows the extent of gravel extraction just 20 years after the licence had been granted. The image also shows the open ploughed fields to the right, hay meadows to the north, an avenue of trees, and the view of the development across the river at Twickenham. This is a reconstruction of the area that gravel was extracted from and the areas that were degraded by the works involved. It's possible that the extracted areas were more extensive than shown. Like in this middle section, where there's no evidence within the documents, but it probably was also removed. Also, housing in the 1930s limited any eastward expansion of the extraction. In this image, I've superimposed the houses built in the 1960s and the 1980s on the area of the gravel pits that were infilled. These two green areas in the infill between the 1927 and the 1951 photo, they show the yellow bound area in the 1951 map shows trees which were missing on the earlier photo. This is a reminder showing a section of the 1927 photograph. Therefore, these areas are the oldest from regrowth after infill. Other areas were infilled up to the mid-60s with post-war bomb site rubble, slum clearance, road construction sites and anything else that slipped in, including a report of a double-decker bus. As is typical with secondary vegetation, areas without vegetation directly after infill have quickly turned to scrub or woodland. The grassland areas are less than half of the present-day hamlands. These areas need management to keep them open. This northern section of hamlands is on alluvial soil and wasn't extracted. Flower-rich floodplain meadows have been managed for hay and aftermath grazing for hundreds of years, but most have been lost during the second half of the 20th century. The vegetation in this area would have evolved over time as hay meadows favour spring and early summer flowering plants that set seed before the hay cut. Also, as the tidal areas of the Thames were enclosed, over time the upper tidal reaches would have extended further upstream, currently reaching Teddington Lock. Therefore, the floodwaters would have changed from freshwater to brackish waters. Plants that couldn't tolerate these saline waters would have died out. Furthermore, as human activity polluted the Thames, these waters could have degraded these meadows as they flooded. This is an early restoration zone, referred to earlier, which has its own distinct biodiversity within hamlands. The character of these two small interconnected meadows is very similar to the areas of South Hamlands. It is possible that they were filled in late with similar infill material as in the south. A plan for a lake with a public gardens was planned for in this section. This area of South Hamlands is dominated with hogweed, wild carrot, lucerne, yellow vetch and grass vetchling can be also found. This area has high biodiversity, unusual soil structure. Many plants, like the common knapweed, are smaller than is usual. This plant is a quarter of the normal size. This middle section is particularly high in diversity. Red Bartsia is partially parasitic on grass roots. It's more recently recorded on hamlands and probably arrived in someone's shoes from areas further south. Its establishment will benefit the other wildflowers by reducing the grass competition. Back to my project, how to illustrate a meadow. I didn't want it to be grounded, that is, with a top or a bottom. We experience the world from different angles. We walk through a meadow, we lie down in it. We pick a flower or a leaf to look at it close up. We might press a plant between the pages of a book as a memento. I wanted to show plants over the whole growing season. Also, to overcome aspects of scale, as some plants are very small or trail along the ground, others can be a metre tall. When you explore a meadow, you get down on your knees, maybe with a magnifying glass. Leaves are present for a much longer time than flowers, and carefully collected can have good diagnostic character. Leaves are also commonly overlooked. Setting some rules. All leaves should be collected from the mid-stem and include their stipules, the leafy appendixes at the base of the leaf stalk, unless, that is, there are only basal leaves. Here's an example of a mid-stem leaf versus a basal leaf. And these mid-stem leaves can be very difficult to cut as they often wrap around the stem. Here this yarrow leaf, you can see how it is attached to the stem. ID can also be very difficult. All of these in the Astrolaceae family. These are my collecting tools. A bottle with a little bit of water to keep the sample fresh, a bag, secateurs, gloves for the spiky plants like thistles or stinging nettles. I like to press my leaves in a traditional flower press. Using this method, the plants are less flattened. Drying times vary. These 3 curled dock leaves changed over time. 2 days on the left, 2 weeks on the right. Each leaf is named and bagged before it's photographed. Leaves were placed on a glass sheet with light both above and below to capture the leaf structure. Its name and a scale bar are included in this photograph. Here you see my computer tethered to my camera. This helps me see the light ratio for each leaf. I create a file with a circle template to help with the composition and scale bar, which is in the bottom right hand corner. Each image was imported, rescaled. Here you can see the scale bar and the image scale bar together. Zoom out again. Leaf images placed into the composition. Extra areas are then removed. Template turned off, and you have your first image in the composition. Next, I wanted to show you some of the leaves and where they were collected from. This beautifully scented meadow sweet is only found in a narrow strip within the former hay meadow in the north. Comfrey is found across Hamland, but it's particularly clustered into 3 sites in both the north and the south. This is cuckoo flower or lady's smock. It flowers in early spring in wet areas and sometimes very, very large stands of it. This is grass vetchling. It thinks it's a grass when in fact it's a pea, and if it's not in flower it's very difficult to spot. Here you can see it's mostly found in the south with small patches in the alluvial section in the north. I've only found great knapweed in one location where there are just 4 very short plants in the northern section. Dark mulligan also in the northern section and again in only 4 stands. They're quite large, but it's a very limited distribution. Hairy vetchling is an interesting member of the community, first recorded 300 years ago and classified as an alien species, although more recently as native, probably the only remaining location within London, and even here it occupies less than a metre square. Interestingly, it was first recorded on Hamlands in the mid-60s, which is soon after the area was infilled. Within the London area, yellow vetchling is rare. William Curtis noted that in 1777. It can be found at several locations, but the largest subpopulation is to the south of Hamlands, close to Riverside Drive. Within Greater London, Hamlands hosts the only population of hoary singfol. Until recently, just a single 1/4 metre square patch. This is being encroached upon by other more vigorous vegetation. However, a second small patch is establishing nearby. To mark its unique place in the London flora, the Friends of Hamlands have made it their symbol. Within the Meadow Community image it is therefore placed in the centre of the image. These 2 leaves show the timescale of the image. The cowslip is from spring, the aster from autumn, 5 months apart. The deep-rooted lucerne is a very variable plant, both in flower colour and height, an introduced species and probably a remnant of London past. It would have been grown as a clover crop for cow and horse feed. London once had 30,000 horses and many small briars throughout the capital, with a few dairy cows in each. Seed could have been present in the infill material when stables and briars were demolished, or earlier when animals were mucked out and the soiled bedding spread on orchards and fields for nutrients. When I started this project, I wasn't sure how it would look. Here are 5 clovers, which look just as different in leaf as in flower. Called arable fieldweeds, horrible name, red campion and the closely related soapwort would get mixed with straw used for cattle bedding, then returned to fields and dug in to sprout again. Also, because of the size of the seed, they would often get mixed in with the main cash crop in an arable field, and a portion of which would then be resown with the next harvest. Here are different species of rumex. The sheep sorrel may be a remnant of the acid grasslands that used to be widespread in this area. Barnes Common, in the east of the borough, has the best acid grasslands in London, with other fragments found in Richmond Park. I thought this group was just fun. Onions, carrots and mint. Cleavers, or some may now call it the Velcro plant, is all too common to many gardeners. Ladies' bed straw is less so, but its intoxicating scent filling the air makes it a very welcome plant. The tiny but numerous flowers create a yellow haze in many of Hamland's meadows. I've mentioned meadowsweet before. It's another highly scented meadow flower. In the past, plants were dried and scattered across the floor. As one stepped on them, their scent was released. This was one of the trickiest leaves to cut and press. In this illustration, you can see that the opposite leaves are joined. Rainwater often collects in this section, giving rise to several folklore remedies from drinking the water. I needed to tunnel out the stem before pressing, and without cutting this very, very thin leaves. Just 2 patches of chicory are found on Hamlands. This is a cultivated plant near Ham House, which is more than a metre tall. On Hamlands, they grow to about 15 to 30 centimetres tall. Coltsfoot, or sun before father, is very easily missed when in flower in the spring. Short stems with dandelion-like flowers, but no leaves. You need to remember the spot and return later when the leaves emerge. The botanical name Tassilago, or tassis, meaning cough, as the leaves are thought to be shaped like the lungs. Dry leaves were used as herbal tobacco, or in Somerset known as baccy. For comparison, here's a familiar dandelion, which of course is from the French lion's tooth. Here the tooth are very spiky. Early books and records of plants were concerned with the economic, agricultural or medicinal use, often with simple descriptions and illustrations. Reference to the location of the plant can be found growing are uncommon. William Turner's The Names of Plants from 1548. He lists goat's beard as plentiful in the fields of London. This is therefore one of the first plants listed in London. Many of his plant records come from Sion House, which is just a few kilometres downriver on the Middlesex side. Others know it as Jack Go to Bed Before Noon, as it only flowers on sunny mornings. I've only been talking about meadow plants of Hamlands in relation to my leaf image. However, with all this biodiversity comes a wealth of other insects, birds, bats, badgers, etc. This next series of maps shows the growth of London starting in 1872 as the effects of the railways start to take hold. This is at the close of the Victorian period. It seems to double in just 20 years. To the 20th century. By 1935, there's an interesting pattern emerging in southwest London. These green areas are mostly within what is today the London Borough of Richmond upon Thames, home to Kew Gardens, Barnes Common, Richmond Park, Bushy Park, Hampton Court Palace and, of course, Hamlands. Long before the expansion of London, the natural environment of Hamlands had changed. The flood areas were managed as hay, which favoured some species over others. Woodland was cleared and put under the plough. Through a strange twist of fate, the extraction of gravel and subsequent infill has given new life to the area. Hamlands is now a library of many of the plants that were once common across London and now rare. Hamlands is a vibrant, dynamic, living library of London's wildflowers. Before I close this talk, I want to draw attention to another subject: large herbivores. Richmond Park still has deer, some friendlier than others. Herbivores help shape the landscape and maintain biodiversity. This natural balance is sadly missing in most of our world places. Therefore, I would like to pay tribute to the large mammals helping to maintain Hamlands. And of course, anyone is encouraged to join them. Here are their address. Finally, I'm going to close with a few minutes just to sit and explore the meadows. Thank you for watching.